A shared load balancer can help you to reduce costs and easily set up an SSL certificate for your applications on ElasticBeanstalk, and it can be a really good approach, especially for testing applications and environments. Hello everyone, this is Marco speaking. Today you will learn how to set up a shared load balancer on ElasticBeanstalk, so you can use the exact same load balancer for multiple applications. Use a host-based routing, which means that we're gonna use different hosts for routing to different applications. Let's say, for example, that we have the first host, which is going to be, for example, www.myapp1.mydomain.com. This host is going to route to the first application, and if we have a www.myapp2.mydomain.com, it's going to route to the second application, and if we have a www.myapp3.mydomain.com, it's going to host to the third application, and so on. So you can host many applications using the exact same shared load balancer in your ElasticBeanstalk applications. So let's do this. But before we proceed, if you like this kind of content, just give me a thumbs up, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so we can learn more about AWS ecosystem. And don't forget about it, the more we learn, the better we'll become, and more value we can provide. So let's do this. Also, before we proceed, it's important to mention that you must have a domain and a hosted zone on AWS. So in my case, for example, I have a domain here on Route 53, and I also have a hosted zone. You can buy a domain inside the AWS console using the Route 53 and the domain section on the registered domains, or you can buy the domain outside from AWS, and then you create the DNS records point to a hosted zone inside AWS. So in my case, I bought a domain outside of the AWS, but I pointed to AWS infrastructure, and then I created the hosted zone here. So this is the domain that I bought for making the experiments, mpcsj.online. Okay, perfect. So now you need to know that for keep going, you must buy a domain, and you also must create a hosted zone on AWS. Perfect. Let's keep going. So the first thing that we need to do is to actually create the load balancer. So let's do this. Let's go to the EC2 console. We go here, and then we search for the load balancer section. If you don't find it, you can go to the left section and then search for load balancers, and then let's create a new load balancer. I'm gonna use an application load balancer, the first kind here. I'm gonna call it shared load balancer. Perfect. So here I'm gonna select 3 availability zones for deploying our applications. I'm gonna select US West 2A, 2B, and 2C. For having a highly resilient application, you must have at least 3. It's recommended for you to have at least 3 availability zones. So let's keep going. And then for the target group, for now I don't have a target group here. I'm gonna create a default target group. I'm gonna click here. So I'm gonna basically route to the instances. I'm gonna say that this is the default target group for shared apps. This is up to you. Next. For now, I'm not gonna select any instance running on EC2. I'm just gonna create a target group to be the default target group for the load balancer. Let's refresh it here and select it here. Perfect. Let's keep going. Perfect. In a few minutes, we're gonna have our shared load balancer, which is going to be used for multiple applications on ElasticBeanstalk. It is provisioning, but in a few minutes, it will be ready for usage. Okay, perfect. After a few minutes, our load balancer is active and ready to use. So let's do something. I'm gonna click here. I'm gonna change the rules to use HTTPS instead of HTTP. So I'm gonna create a new listener here. Point using the HTTPS protocol on port 443, and this one is going to forward the request to the default target group Perfect. And the policy, I'm gonna select this one. Yes, this one is gonna work for us. I'm gonna click it here. And for the certificate, you must also create a certificate on Certificate Manager. So you can go to Certificate Manager on AWS. And then you create a certificate, and then you add an entry for your certificate on the Route 53 hosted zone. So after creating the certificate and pointing it to the hosted zone, you can use it here on your load balancer. So in this section here, I'm going to select my certificate that I created from Certificate Manager to the load balancer. So this is going to allow us to have HTTPS rather than HTTP for our applications. Perfect. Let's keep going. I'm going to add this listener. And for the default listener on port 80, what I'm going to do, I'm gonna click here. I'm going to click to edit listener, and I'm gonna forward the request from port 80 to port 443. So whenever someone tries to use HTTP, the application will be redirected to HTTPS. So all requests to our load balancer will be secure. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to redirect everything from port 80 to port 443. Perfect. So whenever someone tries to use HTTP, it's going to redirect to HTTPS. So all routes will be secure. And then we save the changes. Perfect. Let's go back to the load balancer. And now we have the two listeners here. Now that our configuration for the load balancer is complete, let's go back to ElasticBeanstalk. So I'm gonna search here for ElasticBeanstalk. And then I'm gonna create a new application. I'm gonna call this application of MPCSJ shared app. So since this is the application, you might see some things slightly different. So I'm gonna select here to use the Docker platform. And then let's click to configure more options. So I'm gonna show you something. We go to the capacity section. We have to switch from single instance to load balanced for our environment. And then we click to save. And then we go to the load balancer section. So if the option to switch between dedicated and shared load balancer is not showing up to you, it's probably because this is the first application that we're creating. And then in this case, we have to cancel. Go back and click to cancel again. But in this case, we have the application that we created. So we click here and then we click to create a new environment rather than create a new application. So we click to create a new environment, and it's going to be a web server. And then we call this is going to be the shared app 1 environment. And then in this case, we're going to select Docker again to the platform. And then here, click to configure more options. Perfect. On the capacity section, we click to edit, just like we did before. And then we switch here to load balanced. And then we click to save. And then we search for the load balancer section. We click to edit. And now we can see the dedicated and shared load balancer. Previously, we couldn't see this because we were configuring the first environment for the application in this. So if that situation happens to you, you just cancel it and then use the same application to create a new environment rather than create an application. So you will see the dedicated and shared options to use the load balancer. In this case, we're going to switch this to shared. And then here we select the load balancer that we created previously. For the listener, we're gonna use the port 443 because we want the application to have HTTPS rather than HTTP for making the call secure. Perfect. Let's go to the rules section. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna create a new rule. I'm gonna call this route to app 1. And I'm gonna switch this to host header. So whenever someone tries to do a www.shared app1.mpcsj.online, which is my domain on Route 53, and whenever someone tries to do the same but without the www, it's going to route to this application. Perfect. And then I click to add. Make sure here to use the listener on port 443 rather than 80 for having secure calls. And then that's it. And then we click to save. Perfect. Now let's click to create our app. Create environment, sorry. Perfect. In a few minutes, our app will be complete and ready to use. Okay, perfect. After a few minutes, our application is ready to use on ElasticBeanstalk. And then if you go here on configuration section, and then we scroll to the load balancer, we can see the subdomain that we defined for this app, shared app 1. So I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna go to Route 53. Then we click here. We go to our hosted zone for this domain. In my case is the mpcsj.online. And then here I'm going to create a new record. I'll click here. And then this is going to be the subdomain. Since we're pointing to a ElasticBeanstalk application, we're going to switch this to alias. And then we select ElasticBeanstalk here on the list. We choose the region, which is Oregon in my case. And then we select the environment, which is the one that we just created. And then we click to create a new record. Perfect. In a few minutes, our domain will be ready to use. Okay, perfect. Now that our domain is ready to use, let's go back to it. And this is the whole domain. Let's copy this and paste this on the browser. If we can't use it, just like in this case, for example, it's gonna load forever, but the app won't be able to access it. So if this situation happens to you, what do you need to do? You need to go back to EC2, and then we search for the load balancer that we are using. Click here. This is the load balancer. And then we have to go to the security section. And then we go to the security group that we're using. For example, this security group for the load balancer. And then what we need to do, we need to enable the access on port 443 for this load balancer. Otherwise the browser won't be able to access the application because the port 443 is closed to be accessed. So we click to edit inbound rules on the security group, and then we add a new rule to HTTPS from anywhere. So if you want, you can add a description here. Allow secure access to the app. This is optional, you don't need to put this. Then I click to save a rule. And then here we refresh the page. Perfect. Now we can access our application and use the shared load balancer, as you can see here. And we also have HTTPS. We can see the log here showing that our application is secure on ElasticBeanstalk. Let's create a new application to demonstrate that we can create many applications using the same load balancer. This is going to help you to save a lot of money on ElasticBeanstalk. So let's go back to ElasticBeanstalk. And then here, this is our application. Let's create a new environment. It's going to be a web server again, but this is going to be the shared app 2. And in this case, I'm going to use a Node.js application. And then I click to configure more options. And then we go to the capacity section. Here we switch from single instance to load balanced. And then I click to save. And then here on the load balancer section, let's search for it here. We click here. Again, we switch to shared load balancer. And then we point to the same load balancer on port 443. And then we create a new rule. I'm gonna call this route to shared app2, and it's going to be a host header again, which is going to be www.sharedapp2, or the same without the www. And then we add, oh sorry, I switched this to host header, and then click to save. Oh sorry, I forgot my subdomain, .mpcsj.online. And then here, an mpcsj.online. Perfect. Let's click to add. Perfect. Now let's check it again. We're using the listener on port 443, and then we click to save. And then we click to create an environment. You know what? I'm gonna do the same, but now it's going to be a Python application. So we're gonna have 3 different apps using the same shared load balancer. Let's click here while the second one is being created. Let's create a third one. Web server. This is going to be, have I selected the same app? Let me check. Applications. Create an environment on the same application. And then this is going to be the shared app 3. This is going to be a Python app. Configure more options. Capacity, we switch to load balanced. Click to save. And then on the load balancer again, we click here. We switch to shared load balancer. Select the shared load balancer on port 443. Add a new rule. Route is going to be called route to shared app3. It's going to be a host header, www.sharedapp3.mpcsj.online, and the same but without the www. Then click to add, and then we click to save, and then here we click to create an environment. Perfect. In a few minutes, our 2 apps will be ready to use. We're going to set up the subdomains on Route 53 just like we did for the first one. Okay, perfect. After a few minutes, the 2 new apps that we created are ready to use. So we can see it here. This is the Node.js app, and the other one is the Python app. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to the Route 53 and to the hosted zone. Then I'm going to create the new record to the second app, which is the shared app 2. And we can switch this to alias, ElasticBeanstalk, Oregon. This is going to be shared app 2. Click to create a new record. And then we do the same for the third one. Shared app 3, switch to alias, ElasticBeanstalk, Oregon, and then this is the app 3. Then I click to create the record. Perfect. In a few minutes, both domains will be ready to use. Okay, perfect. After a few minutes, let's try. Let's go back to the browser. I'm gonna search for shared app 2.mpcsj.online, and perfect, we can access the second application, which is the Node.js application that we created on ElasticBeanstalk. And then let's try to see the third app, which is the Python app. We switch this to shared app 3, and perfect, this is the third app that we created with Python. So now we have 3 applications, 3 different applications on ElasticBeanstalk using the same shared load balancer, helping us to save costs and to easily set up the load balancer for our applications. If you like this kind of content, just give me a thumbs up, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you in the next time.